Good evening, colleagues, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Services, Climate Change and Scrutiny Management Committee on today, Monday, the 7th of October. We don't have any external guests, so I don't need to make the usual housekeeping announcements. We'll begin with apologies. I received apologies from Councillor Rowley, who is due to be subbed by Councillor Stewart, who hopefully is on his way, and from Councillor Widdowson, who's substituted by Councillor Mason. Can I ask members if they have any declarations of interest they wish to make at this point? No, thank you. Agenda item 2, the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of September. Do any members have any matters of accuracy from the minutes? No? Are we happy to agree those as an accurate record? Thank you. Agenda item 3, public participation. We have no registered speakers today, so that deals with that agenda item. Which takes us on to agenda item 4, finance and performance monitor 1. We'll take the monitor 1, 24-25 monitor 1, and the 23-24 outturn, which was published as an agenda supplement. And we'll take the 23-24 outturn item first, and then the Q1 monitor, if that's okay. Debbie and Ian, do you want to briefly introduce the 23-24 outturn, please?
Yeah, so from a financial perspective, the outturn position, as you've seen from the exec report back in July, was much improved from what we were forecasting at monitor 3 and throughout the year. And that was due to a significant amount of work undertaken by officers across all services in the council. However, I would, in my usual ER style, point out that there is still an overspend and there is still an underlying overspend, and therefore it's not, problem solved. It was better than forecast. I think within the areas for this committee in particular, the main pressure was relating to within housing benefits, but that issue has now been resolved, and that's no longer a pressure. So I don't know if there's any on performance here.
No, very little performance. Outturns for 23-24 were about as expected and follow the patterns of the rest of the year.
Great, thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Ian. So, members, if I can invite any comments or questions, and if we can focus our attention on paragraphs 10 to 29 and the scorecard, which sets out the matters that relate to the remit of this committee. Councillor Rose.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess, as we say at every meeting, things still aren't as good as they need to be, but they're better than they were a year ago. I just wanted to look at the two tables on number 13, which is this financial year versus last financial year for CFO and similar rows. They're all a lot better this year, but a lot of them are zeros. I just wanted to get clarity on whether this is a picture of the fact that we are better than we were a year ago, or that we were last financial year, or whether the fact that there's lots of zeros in there is actually it's mid-year and they're not all realistic estimates for the end of the year position.
Sorry, which page are you talking about?
Sorry, it was paragraph 13, so it's page 10 on to 11 in the full report.
It's a 23-24 outturn.
Oh, are we on the supplement, not on the? Sorry, that's my bad. Ignore me then. Come back to me later.
Yeah, so the 23-24 outturn agenda supplement. Any Councillor Healy?
Thank you, Chair. On page 3, item 10 in the table, the second line down, HR and corporate management has a minus 18,446,000. For my benefit and for the members of the public, this watching, why is that a negative figure and why is it so large?
I should have checked this, shouldn't I? But I didn't look at the 23-24 because we were focused on 24-25. I think it's to do with recharges, but I won't wing it. I'll go away and check it and send you an email if that's okay.
Yeah, I thought it might be that, but if you could do, that'd be great.
Thank you. Councillor Merritt.
Thank you. I was wondering on the performance figures. paragraph 22 table. Obviously, you'd hope that the figure will be going up each time. Is there any national or regional comparators for this so that we can see whether we're doing well or not so well, relatively speaking, because the number itself almost inevitably must go up.
Good performance metric then, isn't it? As it always goes up. Yeah, of course it will do, because we are looking at the certificates, and some of them I think I said in the paragraph there are a decade old. We go around to recertification. I haven't got any regional or national benchmarks to hand, but something we can look into. We do publish an awful lot of EPC data, including at property level, to make that available to residents. But I'll see if I can supplement it with some other data.
Yeah, thank you.
And while we're still on sort of carbon related issues, over the page in the table in paragraph 24, the carbon emissions were still on the 2020 year, which is 4 years out of date. Where does this data come from, and why does it take so long?
I'm not sure I know off the top of my head at the carbon emissions data. I know that we run 3 or 4 years behind on that indicator. Something I can look into, Councillor Mowat, and write back to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of sort of influencing policy, it's a bit difficult to deal with that sort of time lag.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to paragraph 13, holding vacancies, I just wanted to understand what analysis has gone into the knock-on effects of those. In the report, you mentioned the delays in processing housing benefits. There's also been significant problems in delays with housing allocations and repairs. Public realm has been a particular issue, which resulted in me taking out my own shears to some of the hedges. And estate managers, as an example of those frontline services that really do make a difference when they are left vacant, and does cause significant problems in the community. So I'd like to understand what analysis has been made.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. We haven't done any analysis that kind of corporately at that headline level. We directors and corporate directors and directors have the responsibility, obviously, for staffing within their own areas, and they're monitoring the impact overall and escalating that up if they feel the need to. I haven't had anything escalated to corporate management team, but I can certainly take that away and bring that challenge back to say where we think there's an impact and what people are doing about it.
Thank you. Any other questions on the 23-24 outturn? Councillor Healy.
Thanks very much, Chair. Page 7, the table in 25. It's a generic. Let's ask this one first, actually. Average number of sick days has gradually been declining, and you're hoping to get it to the national target of 10.6. Is that decline due to less people off on long-term sick, or is it being seen across the board that there's just less sick being taken, or is it down to better management? Because I know that's been an issue for many, many years. Second from the bottom, and that's it.
Yes, so you're absolutely right. Within 23-24, sickness levels were reducing, getting closer to that public sector average. It's not so much a target, but something that we can benchmark against others. We do monitor the numbers of people who are off long-term or short-term sick at any one point, and the long-term sickness numbers have been pretty steady for people who've been off for 30 days or more across the whole of the year. Haven't changed more than maybe 10 people up or down from about 30 or 40 people, around about that level. So therefore, we have made more impacts on the short-term sickness. We've seen, obviously, a systems that we've had in place to help us deal with sicknesses and authority, such as the Medigold sickness. So I think it's helping managerial action, helping tracking when we need to make interventions and work with staff for their welfare. So yeah, probably reduction in short-term sickness.
Did you have another question?
Yeah, another one. There's quite a lot in this particular table about the talk about panel. Are we confident that that talk about panel, A, gets refreshed, and B, is representative of the city? It's just that I would guess, and I'm only guessing here, that it's probably skewed by age to older people, and it's probably skewed by wealth to more wealthier people, just based on them having more time and interest to do this. And, you know, ethnicity, country of birth, you know, have we tried to sort of get all those in there?
So just a bit of the outline for the talk about panel. There's around about 1,000 people on the talk about panel within the city. We probably get about 60% of people who return for most talk about questions. We use for 2 surveys a year, but we also send out lots of other surveys on behalf of the authority. To answer your question on representative, yes, I think that it is a fair representation of the city for age, ethnicity, country of birth. It's very difficult. It's a difficult thing to track. And every year we publish something on the open data platform about the talk about panel makeup, just so that we can show that we're keeping a track of that. The 2 bits that you mentioned, which are difficult to do, are wealth, okay, because we're not asking questions about income, but we are trying to have a geographic mix of people within the panel, so they're from across the city. And the other question you asked about refreshed is a difficult one. We're always encouraging people to come onto the panel, but it's not often that we ask people to leave the panel. People choose to leave. We keep the numbers around about 1,000 or so. There's ways for people to sign up through a number of mediums of the council, across the council website as well.
Thank you. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair, and good evening. It's nice to see you all. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about paragraph 29 on page 7, which is about the customer centre. And I don't know whether you'll have the information to hand or not. So I guess it's partly, do you know anecdotally, or partly can we get the information? Obviously, this committee was quite interested in the way the call centre was working and thinking about the times it was taking to answer calls, and it seems to have had a dramatic improvement in terms of the average answer times. I just wanted to check, first of all, has that also meant that there's been a drop in the number of difficult calls that staff are taking? Because I think that was something that we were quite concerned about. And also, I think we were concerned that there was quite a high turnover of staff within the call centre. And again, just based on this one paragraph with not a lot of information, it looks like things are a bit better. But I'm just wondering if you have any information that you can share with us on
that. Don't run the customer centre, but so it's very difficult to track difficult calls. Okay, I think that's definitely something anecdotal that comes out of the head of customer services who's closer to it. On your question about staffing, there's definitely been more stability of staffing. There was certainly some challenges there about recruitment and turnover during 22-23, and I think that has been a big part of the reason actually you've seen the numbers reduce. Also, just that general service improvement across the council, looking at how we deal with customers on the website, trying to make sure we've got as much information, advice, guidance for people, so less calls are coming through, so people can support themselves there. I'll come on to 24-25 in a minute, where we might see it slightly go a different direction, but we also have to remember we've had large projects like the Green Waste project within the city, where a lot of traffic has then gone back through the customer centre. So I'd expect those numbers to rise, not quite back to 22-23 levels, but certainly up over the summer.
Okay. Just say we've got customer experience on our as yet unallocated list of topics for future agendas, but just coinciding with sort of officers' availability. Councillor Coles.
Thanks. Just a couple of small supplementaries on the talk about panel. My recollection was that the breakdown on age demographics wasn't particularly representative of anyone under 18, and just whether any progress had been made with the younger age groups and ensuring that they were represented, given that they'll be the kind of citizens, if you like, in a voting sense in the future. And just on that point, Councillor Crawshaw's point around the customer centre, just any other insights on volumes and the pressures that is bringing to bear, whether or not that improved performance around speed of response is actually just down to a decreasing volume of calls, which is still good. It's just a different kind of good. And yeah, if you're anticipating it going in the other direction, whether that's got any resourcing implications. Thanks.
Who would like to have a go at that?
I've got some questions for Debbie. Okay, so have we done anything specific for young people to talk about? I think we've tried through lots of the social media work within the comms department and the way that they're looking at the reach to promote as many of the consultations we can, not just to the Talk About panel, but to the wider city and wider residents. And I think you see that in some of the levels of responses by the different age groups coming back. We did make an effort to kind of go out and promote the Talk About panel to people like the Youth Council last year, went along to a number of their meetings, tried to get some more sign-ups, and that certainly has changed a little bit of the sign-up makeup. But I think I probably answered a bit of that question before, and the refreshing piece before, we probably need to do a little bit more in that area. Question about the call centre. Once again, I'm not the head of customer services, thankfully, but in terms of the performance, the decreasing volume of calls, I think we still continue to see a relatively stable, not high, stable level of calls for things that I would describe as envirocrime, okay, which is a lot of the calls that come into the customer centre, whether or not that be vegetation or graffiti or highways, and levels of those have stayed pretty similar for the last couple of years. We track them on a 12-month rolling basis. So I'm not seeing a decrease in volume there, but we've taken as an authority, haven't we, more and more processes that have gone online. So some of those revenues and bends, those processes, potentially some bits around council tax, we'll see a decreasing piece there. In terms of our resourcing going forward, we've obviously had to have some additional resourcing over the summer to help deal with green waste. I mean, we've had over 34,000 subscribers, of which 20% of them have needed support outside of just usual digital means. So that has definitely put resourcing pressure on there. And we've got to think carefully, I think, as an authority about how we deal with that towards the back end of this year and into next year as the scheme goes forward.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of quick questions on the tables on page 3. So this overall area turned around in the last 3 months by just short of £1 million, from an 830,000 overspend to an 89k underspend. I can't see anywhere in the page 4 narrative that fully explains that. There's obviously 300k one-off raid on CYT, which was a third of that, and there's little bits and pieces, but I'm not seeing the numbers that would evidence where that significant. I mean, £1 million on £9 million budget in 1 quarter is a hell of a shift. If every single department could shift by 10% in that particular period, then we'd be in a significantly better position. So it's more clarity about where that 919,000 has come from. And then my second one was around, obviously at that top table, you reference the use of earmarked reserves at the end of the year to balance. What we did see throughout the year is use of reserves in year and in departments, which I've not noticed us do before. So that figure doesn't really give us a true picture of how much reserves was used. So there was 4.25 million taken from earmarked reserves at the end. I know, for example, I think about 300 to 400,000 pounds was taken out of public health reserves in year on various different pressures, and children's services also took some money out of reserves. So would it be possible to get a figure of the total number of reserves, and also going forward some clarity of how we record how much reserves have been used?
Yeah, I can take that away. I mean, the use of earmarked reserves, it's not complicated. It's just that they're earmarked reserves for a purpose. They should be being used for that purpose. So to track the use of them all is well, we haven't got the capacity to do it. It's just part of an overall officer decision about the most effective way to fund a cost. And sometimes that'll be earmarked reserves because that's what the earmarked reserve is set there to do. And I will then build into the MTFS, or if it's an ongoing pressure. So if it's an ongoing pressure, as you know, funded from a one-off reserve, then that's something that, of course, I'm interested in, and we will make provision for, or there'll be an alternative saving instead. But certainly, yeah, take your point. I can look at where else reserves were used during the year, and I can do a more detailed explanation of Q3 to outturn. That's fine. I'll take that away.
So, and on the customers and communities row of that table, was that your other?
Yeah, that's I mean, yeah. So I'll do the
Okay.
explanation of Q3 to outturn.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just for the reason I'm flagging, I mean, public health is a good example because it sits there and it says 568,000 zero variance, and everyone sits there and thinks that's wonderful, everything's perfect, nothing's happening, there's no concerns. But if you factor in the fact that they've only hit zero because they used £350,000 from the public health reserve.
Yeah, I don't think we did in the
pressure.
end. That's what I mean. I don't think we did use that in the end, which is why I just need to go away and check exactly what we use. So what we will assume during the year as part of the forecast and what we actually use at the year end will be very different. And so I don't think we did use that, but I will go away and double check.
Thank you. Councillor Merritt.
Yes, on paragraph 14 on page 4, we've got the issue of the continued pressure from loss of external payroll contracts. I mean, that's been going on for a while, hasn't it? Obviously losing legacy arrangements. Is that because we are just simply not competitive, or is it because of changing technologies and it's so much easier for people to do their own stuff? Is there any way we can make an effort to retain the market, or is it not worth doing? And is our own setup efficient? Times?
It is something that it's a combination of probably all those reasons, but one of the main reasons has been, as schools have gone to academies, they've joined a larger group of schools, and therefore they tend to come with their own kind of like corporate contracts almost. So if you join an existing academy, they've already got a payroll team or provider, and therefore we've lost the business through the fact that they've just joined an existing group or an existing structure. It's not business we've actively sought out. We concentrate on the council's payroll rather than going out and seeking business. We're never going to be especially competitive in that kind of world because there are lots of other companies that do that, as well as loads of other things, other accountancy support and that kind of thing. So they tend to offer more of a more encompassing kind of business support model that includes other things alongside payroll.
Thank you. Not seeing any further hands. So if we draw a line under 23-24 and move ahead to 24-25, Q1 finance and performance monitor.
Yeah.
So we're now back in the main pack. Is there anything you want to say by way of introduction?
Well, I'll just again point out that there's a forecast overspend across the council of just over 3 million, which again is still an overspend, but it is a huge improvement from last year at this time, where we were looking at a figure of around about 11 million. So don't want to diminish the kind of work that's been done or the achievement that there's been in getting that overspend down, but there is still an overspend. So the work continues, cost control measures, all those things kind of continue. And just to pick up Councillor Rose's question from earlier around the fact that there aren't any kind of specific variances in the same way that there were last year. It is because things have got better. But it is also because it's Monitor 1. So at Monitor 1, even if there is an issue, there's time for it to be resolved, and therefore we'll try other alternatives. It will be as we go through the year that you would expect to see more variations, but things are much improved, and we've made proper provision as far as we can for those areas where we knew there was a pressure.
Thank you. So again, if I can ask for any questions or comments from members, focusing on paragraphs 13-28 and the scorecard, which relate to the remit of this committee. Councillor Eyre. Oh, sorry, before I do that, Councillor Rose, did you want to come back with any?
I think that covered the point. The main point was that the variance had gone from 7.9% last year to 1.12 or whatever it is this year, and that's been answered.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
going to be cheeky, Chair, and I'm actually going back to paragraph 12. And you said I could only start at paragraph 13. And it's just trying to get some clarity around, and this is always difficult because when we do major service restructures, we change directorates and then you report on directorates, and then it becomes absolutely impossible then to start to sort of cross-examine what's happened previously and before. But what is striking is that obviously the budget went up from 141 million last year to 149 million. That was £8 million of growth, primarily in social care. But the net budgets of the two social care areas are actually less. Where has that £8 million of growth gone? Because it appears, in all intents and purposes, to have gone into corporate and central services.
That's our old friend overhead recharges again, that will be still sat in corporate services that need to be allocated out. We can't always do it in the first quarter of the year. The ambition is always to try and do it before the start of the year, but it's usually the summer and a bit beyond. So I'll pick that up and hopefully we'll get that resolved for Monitor 2. But if not, it is to do with the recharges. And I'm sorry, I know we need to be a bit clearer about that. And I probably just need to put in the table whether recharges are included or not. And that would, I'm sure, help. So I'll take that away.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Merritt.
Looking at the performance table at the on the back page of 18, welcome improvements there in terms of responses to FOIs and EIRs, some very good results there. But if you then go down a bit in terms of data protection, SARs, percentage of 4C complaints and the grade 1 and 4C complaints, there's been some really big drops there. What's the story behind that?
So I think you'll have Lorraine at your committee at some point, mightn't you? She runs a.
We've got
She's on
complaints and compliments next month.
So it's on there. So I won't steal all of her thunder, but the comment I just say on complaints is we haven't been as good at closing them down on the IT systems as we have been previously. I think there are some positive signs, even though with the low numbers, about the number of complaints that have come into the authority across the board, and you can really see that in the figures, and you can see that going out to the departments, but we have to be a bit better at closing them down. The figures that aren't in this report, which are July and August figures, show that we're right back up to about 90% or so for the complaints. We're in a similar position to we are last year, but I think we were weak as an authority about closing things at the start. So something to look at and try and be better.
Yeah, I mean, something we can pick up with Lorraine. So that when we've discussed it previously, we've talked about the delay relating to the service areas with whom the complaint is sitting in terms of providing a response to the customer service team, so they can either close the case down because otherwise they don't know that a response has been sent to the customer. So coming back to me from previous years' discussions, but it's something that we can pick up with Lorraine when we get the annual report on complaints and compliments. Councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, thank you. Just picking up the comment around West offices, and it's always in there about letting out West offices and the shortfall that we find. But I mean, working in a workplace at the moment where we're continuously struggling to rent out an office space as well, and it's a persistent thing. At what point do we just kind of stop forecasting that we'll be able to rent out West offices, I guess, as a reality of the situation with rental space in the city?
Yeah, no, I take your point. We are nearly full. We have made some further lettings this last sort of few weeks, haven't we? So space on the 3rd floor. So there, and the space that we've got left isn't easily sellable because it's open plan. And so yeah, we are kind of at that point now where I think we are kind of fully allocated. So we just need to have another look at the budget and make sure we've not over assumed on the income. So yeah, again, I think the team have done great, actually. Nick and his team, you know, they've negotiated, the Combined Authority have taken on more space, LNER are taking on more space. So it's obviously working. It's obviously a building that people do want to work in and that is working for those partners. So, but I think we're about at that point now where it's pretty full.
Thank you. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. going back to the performance monitor statistics, STF 08, could we add somewhere in the commentary what the equivalent is excluding schools?
This is staff, FTE, CYC total.
Including schools, bracket snapshot.
Yeah, so yes, of course, they can add it in as another line in there. We take a full workforce report along to staffing matters as an urgency. So we do figures for both schools and without schools,
Yeah.
but I'll make sure it's added into school.
Yeah, if you could do that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Coles.
Thank you. I just had a question about, I think it was on the page, the bottom of page 11.19, just about the kind of working more to council wider strategic priorities, and just how that relates to the net position. My question was really whether the pattern of improvement and the right direction that things seem to be going in is something that you think is a pattern that is continuing to go in the right direction, as in it will continue its pace and its trajectory, or is it something that is kind of reached a summit and could then go in the wrong direction, and so we need to look at it again and find new things to look at, or actually do we just need to kind of hold steady and continue along the lines that particularly I'm assuming adult social care and children's services are managing to do to get their budgets more into line? It was just really any sense that you had about that pattern, whether we're at the top of something and therefore there's a risk of it getting hard again in terms of a new set of decisions, or whether or not actually holding the line will help.
I mean, it's an interesting dilemma, isn't it, around the relationship between finance and performance, and does improved performance always cost more money, and doesn't necessarily, but some of it does. So sometimes you can throw a lot of money at something, doesn't make it any better. So I don't know that we've quite fully articulated and understood that challenging across all areas of the council, but certainly with adults and children's. And again, we've got a budget at the end of this month, we've got a spending review in the spring, but certainly when we're talking to other authorities, our position in children's is much better than many of our fellow councils, and so it feels like everything's going in the right direction. But you're right, there is a limit to what we can achieve with the resources that we've got. And therefore, there reaches a point, and I don't think we're there with every service, but there will reach a point in services where we can't do any more without additional investment. And I think that picture's different across the council. I don't know whether that's your impression. Yeah.
Okay. I'll just ask a quick question about page 17 again, the table, the row relating to days taken to process housing benefit claims, which has kind of been creeping upwards. Are there any particular issues in terms of DWP changes that are affecting what we do, or case complexity? Is there anything that we should be concerned about?
Tricky one, that. I'm not sure I know the full answer to that. I think that's probably something we'd have to come back to you about. Obviously, it's a measure that's recorded by the DWP, and we look to follow it in a similar way that you've just described, to see what challenges they may be having, to see how we can work better with them with either an exchange of information or policy decisions. What I would say is that there's been no hint that there's any difficulties in that relationship, or difficulties in those kind of technologies that share data, how we capture information about vulnerable people that are getting passed on to the DWP. So maybe I'll talk to the head of customer services and see if we can just dig into it a little more.
Thank you.
One thing I can just tell you is that we have had just today actually some information from DWP where they've commended us on our housing benefit performance. So it is definitely improved, and to the point that DWP have emailed to the team to point out how impressed they are with the improved performance. So
good.
Yeah,
that's very good. Councillor Merritt.
It was exactly the same question, Chair.
There you go. Councillor Rose.
Thanks. Yeah, going back to the information governance block, and it's a BI question, I'm afraid. And you might not be able to answer, might be something for next time round, but trying to get the BI bit in here. One question that comes up a lot at A&G when looking at the numbers is about completion. I know you mentioned around the complaints and completion timings. Are all of these metrics here excluding things that haven't been closed? So that 97% for FOIER, etc. for this quarter, that's 97% of those that have closed were dealt with in time. Because from memory, most of these exclude the reasonable number that haven't closed, 3 months later.
I think you're right, yes. We track quite successfully, I think, across the organisation, things that are still open. And that's pushed out to managers regularly now, close to corporate management team as well. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that it's the things that are closed that we are doing the percentage of.
Okay. I guess from a BI perspective, it's not an accurate representative quarter on quarter, year on year to compare. The numbers, most recent, are always higher than they should be when looking against previous numbers. That's all.
I'm not sure if that's quite right, because everything will have its own closure timeline. So cases that are coming through in quarter one will have had their 30 or 60 or 90 days or so to close, and cases coming through in quarter two will also have 30, 60 or 90 days. They're not closure times from the 1st of April. So I think that the system should be fine.
But the 85% for the previous FY, for example, will be 85% of everything, because things will have closed 300 days later. They'll be counted in that number, but things that take another 100 days from now won't be in that Q1. So it's something that I've flagged repeatedly over the last year, and I think it's something that still needs to be looked at, because we should be, anything that from Q1 hasn't closed yet has exceeded that 30-day and 60-day window definitively, and some of them will have exceeded the 90 days if they have. And we're missing things that are a failure from that 97%. I just wanted to call that out, I guess, in comparison to previous.
Something I'll have a look into, and I'll have a chat with Lorraine again about those figures.
And I know this isn't really, well, this is a question for you, I guess, but the conversation needs to be at the next meeting. But the complaints bit, those two at the bottom both say responded to in time. You're talking a lot about closed in time, I guess, in response to Dave Merritt's question. That 52%, 48%, is that response speed, not closure speed?
Not sure about the technical definition of that, so we'll have to.
That's all right. I'll leave it for next meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that point that Councillor Rose just raised, I wonder if a better way of expressing the performance would be to say any in that quarter that were not closed on time. So that would include still open cases as well as cases that closed on time in the quarter. So what we're looking at is those with expected closure dates within that quarter, and then we'll know what percentage of those were closed on time and what were not.
Definitely something I can look into. It might be difficult to track back previous performance and just the limitations of the complexity of our complaint system to do lots of time analysis in that way, but something I'll have a look into. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
I think just on that point, it was something we flagged previously, because obviously we had the letter from the Information Commissioner when we had problems with our FOI response, and that seemed to be a lot around the fact that we were just responding and closing incorrectly. So it's very easy to get that number up to nearly 100 if you just say, right, well, we're going to reply and say we're not going to supply the information. Tick, we've responded in 30 days, we've done that. It then goes through a review process, and then we get knocked on the door. So we did raise that at the time about how as a committee we make sure that we're both making sure this metric is right, which is responding in time, but also making sure that those responses are actually robust and defensible.
It's something we can pick up in more detail at the next month's meeting with with Lorraine and Kath and the team. Are there any other questions or comments on the Q1 outturn report?
Can I thank officers for the report and for answering all the questions?
Yes.
And some obviously replies to come.
I think you've got used to answering questions way beyond your work area, but yeah, thank you for that. But please don't go anywhere. Because we move on to agenda item 5, which is a paper on budget setting process for 2025-26. So the paper sets out the work that is ongoing and what future opportunities there will be for Scrutiny to have an input. So Debbie.
So the report is a version of which you've kind of had at this committee before, actually, around the budget setting process. We've talked a little bit today, haven't we, about the financial challenge facing local government. So you're all aware of that, and I think you're all equally aware it's a national problem that probably requires a national solution. So this report doesn't go into the detail of the financial challenge, where it's come from. What it instead talks about is the process around how the council goes about setting its budget and agreeing its budget. So it's more about the process. We've set out in paragraph 6 some detail about the consultation process, some of which has already happened, some of which will happen from next month, or from later this month into run up to Christmas. We then go on to just talk from paragraph 19, the kind of what we do in each month, really, just to show that we're always talking about the budget. It feels like we're always looking at the budget. We're either planning for next year, we're looking at last year. It is a cyclical process, and we're always talking about it. You'll equally be aware that there was a medium-term financial strategy update report at executive last month, which outlined the need to save around 30 million over the next 3 years. And so that medium-term financial strategy, again, is constantly being reviewed, constantly updating. We will be always looking at what our growth assumptions are. Obviously, we haven't got this year's pay award yet, so there are things that could change as we go through the rest of this financial year. And as we said, we've got a budget at the end of this month, the 30th of October. Wouldn't necessarily expect that to change anything in the medium-term financial strategy, because we won't really know the impact on us, if any, until we get our draft settlement in December. And then again, we're expecting a spending review next year in the spring, government spring, so August, I don't know, place your bets now when spring will be. But we should get a multi-year settlement, and obviously, so next year in the spring, when we get that, that'll make medium-term financial strategy and that financial planning much more robust, because at the minute it is still a little bit year on year. We've got that continued uncertainty. So, but the budget process follows the same outline, where we're looking at pressures, we're calculating the gap, the forecast gap, we're looking at proposals that can fill that gap. And so, Chair, when you and I spoke a few weeks ago, I think we agreed that we would start bringing this process budget to remind you, hopefully, of how the budget is set, what the process is, what the various steps, what the consultation is. But obviously we'll be going out for consultation with some more detailed proposals, and it'll be at that point we'll be able to bring those proposals in a bit more detail to this committee, and then you'll be able to undertake some scrutiny of the budget process in a bit more detailed way, and that reflects our discussion.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. So it's really so we understand the process, and we can make any comments or observations on the process, appreciating we're not at the stage of commenting on detailed proposals, because they're not they haven't been shared yet, but will be. So I can invite questions, comments. Councillor Eyre.
Very straightforward on Debbie for a change. So not wishing my life away, but we're already a week through October, so there's only 3 weeks of October left. I would assume if we're meeting this timeline and proposals are coming out in October, you would have an idea of what date that those would be coming out. So are you able to let us know today? And then the follow on from that is we're probably only 5 weeks away from the November meeting of this committee, and that feels like a very tight timetable for you to be able to get those budget proposals out, have some level of conversation, and then back to this committee on the 11th of November to have any meaningful conversation about that.
Yeah, well, we've been meeting with the exec every 2 weeks. As I'm sure you'll be aware, officers will pull together proposals, executive will consider those proposals, they will discuss within group, within executive, and give officers a steer. And that's the process we're in during, like I say, we're meeting every 2 weeks at the moment to refine those proposals and look at the different options. I think there's a slight difference between the proposals that will go out of consultation, where there'll be ideas and suggestions and proposals. They won't necessarily be fully costed business cases with all the issues and risks articulated, because that'll be part of the consultation. Will be what are some of the issues, what are some of the risks, and we will continue working on it through the consultation, through to the outcome of the consultation, right through to December, when we'll hopefully have a balanced budget, because we'll have had the Chancellor's budget. Will have also had our draft settlement ready for executive in January and full council in February. So what will come to this meeting in November, and Katie will correct me if I'm wrong, is what goes out for consultation is what we will be discussing here.
Yeah, so it'll be the proposals on the back of the first phase of consultation, which we will be able to discuss in this forum, as well as the outward facing consultation.
So it was a very simple question. Have you got a date in October when it will be?
Sorry, I haven't. I don't want to commit to a date. I'm hoping.
Will it definitely be October?
Yes.
Well, I look forward to a midnight Halloween email.
Should I say that once more with a bit more confidence? Yes, it will be October. It is tight. You're absolutely right. It is tight, which is my nervousness around committing to a date, because it is going to be tight. And so it is going to be a bit of, burning the midnight oil, so to speak, to just kind of get everything ready and in a position that we're ready to publish it, and we've got everything set up ready to receive comments and feedback. So it is going to be tight, which is my reluctance to commit to a date. Sorry.
That's okay.
But it will be October.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. The question I wanted to ask you was paragraph 3 of your report. I've seen that paragraph in a couple of reports recently, and I think it's really quite striking. And thank you for being very straightforward and honest with us. But it really, I think, for a 151 officer to be putting that into a report gives us all a sense of the level of challenge that there is. And it sort of strikes me that we're having a budget consultation, and nobody ever is going to want to say, oh, I don't want this service, or I don't want that. We as the sort of politicians have to battle it out over which areas the cuts fall. But that sense of actually this is really, really challenging for all of us is quite a neutral position. And I suppose what I'm getting to is, what's the role that the council comms can do as the neutral comms that actually articulates to the city, when you're involved in this consultation, none of us want to make the cuts. We might have to make choices about where they fall or otherwise, but actually sort of conveying that paragraph to the city, because if we say it as politicians, then it's received in a very different way, I suppose.
Yeah, the way that we've dealt with the consultations, we've used the comms team, but we've also used an external company to do the facilitation and to do some of the surveys, and we'll be getting quotes. We'll get quotes again to use. So we'll have external facilitators, and like you say, that independence. It is really difficult. I think it's important that we're clear to residents the scale of the challenge and how difficult it's going to be. But equally, it's not a vote. We're not saying to people which one of these do you want to do, and it is more the challenge is because it is quite a dry subject, and a lot of people are not very interested in it, and it is very complicated. And I don't mean that in a patronising way, and I'm not suggesting that residents wouldn't explain it. I'm just saying it is very complicated, and therefore to explain it to people takes time, and a lot of residents understandably are busy and have got their own lives and jobs, and they haven't got, it's my job to understand that. It's slightly different for me, but it's not your job to then understand it. It is difficult, and it will take time and investment. So getting that message out there is part of the challenge with the consultation and the comms. And so some of the challenges we've had is where we said to people, well, you could cut this and you could cut that, but articulating what the impact of that cut might be is difficult for us to. It's difficult to do it without it sounding like you're setting any hairs running or being overly dramatic. So it takes some time just to get the language right and to explain it in a way that people understand without it being too negative, because it is a challenge, but it's something that can be done. So it is difficult. There are some very difficult and challenging decisions, but it's entirely possible. Does that sorry, waffled a bit?
No, that's helpful. And if I may, just to sort of a follow on, which sort of relates then to some of what you've just said there about, we go to the city with a consultation, but actually, I think we'd all acknowledge, and you've acknowledged, that it's a subject area where there may be a lot of complexity, but also there may be just a lot of people who are just getting on with life and don't have the time or ability or whatever it is to actually go through and complete. So by definition, the responses that we get on it will be a skewed set of responses because it will be a particular type of person that's able or willing to go through. And I'm just wondering, when we're interpreting the responses from that consultation, how do we sort of take that into account and weight that? You know, I'm thinking, for example, lots of people with young children, I would imagine the last thing that they'll want to do at the end of the day is, oh, I'll sit down and do a budget consultation. Whereas there may be people with time on their hands that think, actually, I'd really be interested to get involved in this. And just how that conversation is.
Yeah, that has been one of the challenges, a bit like we talked about earlier, getting younger people involved, getting different residents involved. It is a challenge. The independent sort of facilitators that we've had did quite a lot of work, didn't they, with getting those different groups. They went around various community groups. So it's just about being a bit more proactive, I think, about getting out there to where people are, but also being realistic about you know, you've been elected, haven't you, to represent the city. You don't want to be going back every 5 minutes and asking everybody loads of questions because, you know, you've got to get on with the business of running the council. So it's a combination of trying to educate people and explain what the challenges are, at the same time asking for views about where we can do things differently. Everybody's got an opinion about that usually. And so, yeah, we just need to find ways. It's not going to be perfect this first time. There's probably something we're going to have to refine and improve as we go along.
Thank you. It's really
So
helpful.
I'll invite Councillor Lomas to come in and respond to the consultation points. Are there any other comments or questions around the same themes that Councillor Crawshaw raised in terms of consultation? So yeah, everyone I've got on my list, so I'll go around and then come back to Councillor Lomas. So Councillor Eyre first.
I think it was just layering another level of complexity, because there is a demographic issue that Councillor Crawshaw rightly articulated, but there's also people value services that they use. So, and I don't know how you begin to measure that within the consultation, because yes, that young family with children might not be that bothered, but if their grandparents have just got into a care home, they'll be very, very interested in adult social care, and we'll have a huge view on that one. Obviously, bins is the one universal service we pretty much do provide. So everyone tends to have an opinion on that, but it's very difficult for people who aren't using a lot of the council services to really have a view on how they value. So you have a real problem in terms of saying, well, actually, how do we make sure people understand the 2/3 of what the council does, not just the 1/3 that they see visually every day?
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just in terms of the consultation and the benefits of it, I don't think I've ever met anybody who's, you know, genuinely engaged with the consultation in a positive and wanting to way. I think, you know, people do engage in it for all sorts of reasons, but I don't think people really look at it and think what decisions can they make and everything like that. I think is to make points. So on the cost of the consultation, Debbie, mindful that time is money, and obviously you talked about the external experts, you know, what would you estimate the cost is of the whole consultation process? And then secondly, you know, people I speak to will be absolutely dismissive of the benefits of going in consultation, so they would think nothing would ever change. What would be the most notable things you can think of over recent years which have changed as a result of the consultation process?
Debbie, yeah.
So the cost of the consultation will be between 50 and 100,000, including staff time and everything else. So the cost of the independent facilitators isn't 100,000, that's less than that. But by the time we add in officer time and other issues, so just to give you a ballpark figure. In terms of things changing about consultation, I mean, yeah, you're right. There's nothing immediate that springs to mind. But I think it's as much about communication, isn't it, and consultation. And so maybe we need to more clearly define what we mean by consultation. But it's about engagement and people understanding. So there's some things that, you know, as a unitary council, as a sort of a large complex organisation with a number of moving parts, if somebody comes and says, well, we don't want you to deal with fostering anymore, well, we're not going to say, well, we won't do that anymore, are we? So there's certain, we've got a huge chunk of our spend on like statutory things that we have to do to meet our obligations. So from a budget point of view, there isn't much I can think of in terms of consultation, but we have engaged with staff as well and staff suggestions. And so there have been a number of staff suggestions just about how we do things internally that, again, you know, they won't have saved hundreds and hundreds of thousands, but they've made a difference to how we work. They've made things easier, more straightforward. So it's not, I don't think I would ever say this, it's not just about the money, but it is about improving the process, which eventually will deliver savings.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Thank you. Most of my thoughts have already been covered. I guess the one thing I wanted to ask was, I think paragraph 3 does frame it really well, as Johnny said. You know, I think even some of the most significant financial challenges might be understated. It might be the most significant financial challenge that the City Council has ever experienced, and it's more difficult every year to identify things to cut. The more that things are cut that aren't statutory, there's, you know, a higher percentage of what we do is required each year. We tend to get a lot of responses and give a lot of responses to scrutinies as well of the things we don't want to cut or the things we would like to spend more on. Certainly the press and public have been very vocal about certain things. The flip side of that, I know you mentioned staff suggestions there, and obviously there's some of the groups, including ourselves, on this list, but to what extent have we seen more of that? Here are the things that you can cut, or here are ways of saving money. What more can we do to bring that through? For me, that seems like the better use of scrutiny is how can we facilitate the conversation of, and what else can we cut, or what should we be prioritising cutting, rather than what should we be prioritising saving, which feels like the slant we often come for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The question that I'm always asking people is, what can we stop doing? What can we stop doing? You know, we spend money on lots of things, but it's two main things, and that's staff and that's contracts. We're either paying our staff or we're buying something from somebody else. So we've, you know, my plea to you would be to think about what can we stop doing. There are also the thoughts about what we can get somebody else to pay for, which is fine, but we've got to ask that question about what are the outcomes, what does it deliver, what value does it add, and what can we stop doing. So yeah, totally appreciate that.
And I guess what can we charge externally for, and what can we deliver differently? But
yeah,
we've been doing the consultation. I know it's a bit early, you haven't got a report on it yet, but for this public consultation, have been the questions asked of, and what else can you think of? I know people come to me in a pub sometimes and say, oh, you're a councillor, why don't you use a different type of concrete? And I'm like, nothing's doing me, feed it into the budget consultation. But to what extent is it useful? How much are we bringing through those mechanisms? What more can we do to get more out of public investment?
It has been useful as part of the education process, I think, because what a lot of people have said to us, why don't you do this? And so we already do. Like, oh, I didn't realise you already did that. So it has been useful. I don't think we'd fully appreciated how little some people knew about what we did and what we do, and what value we add, and where we get involved, and what we already do. So a number of the suggestions have been for things that we already do. We are quite ahead of a lot of other councils in, you know, like we talked about letting out this building. Some councils are literally just starting those conversations, and they've had kind of half empty buildings for the last 5 years. You know, so there are things that we're ahead of the curve on, but equally there'll be other things that we are lagging behind in. So it's just trying to find those. So you know, we're trying to look at what the councils are doing. It's not always relevant because different councils, different priorities, different areas. But we try and cast our net as wide, and we're not proud. We'll take any idea from anybody. You know, anything that we think will save us money, and you know, will help. So yeah.
So I've got a couple more hands with consultation related points, and I'll bring Councillor Lomas in. Councillor Mason.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose just going back to that kind of current stage we've just finished. Have you got any kind of numerics, that's the right word, or numbers on kind of how many online physical responses we got to that survey? I don't know how you capture stuff like the social media, but obviously there's been quite a lot of posts about, you know, we love our parks, tell us what you think about parks, we're having to think about what we're doing and all those type of things. I don't know how you kind of quantify all of those, but obviously some of them generated quite a lot of comments.
Yeah, I haven't got it to hand, but certainly in the report next month we can include in that the outcome and the report from phase 1 of the consultation, so you can see what's been said so far.
Super. And then I suppose, I don't know if you can break those down by postcode, just as that we're saying about demographics and where we're getting responses from, just to understand which communities are engaging. And
yeah, I'm not sure about that, but I'll have to have a look. I'm not sure what we've got in terms of the demographics. But yeah.
Okay. I mean more as in, like, you know, 10 houses in Dringhouses filled it out, but 1,000 in Fulford did, or whatever else it might be, I don't know. But that would be really useful. And I suppose going back, you were saying about these ongoing conversations, but I know clearly last time we had with a lot of community groups, or some community groups saying they didn't have notice of things that were coming down the line. I presume we've already started those conversations internally, opposed to external consultants having those conversations.
I think we've kind of talked about it enough and it's been in enough reports, but yeah, I take your point. I'll check that with the team to see what early engagement conversations we're having.
Thanks.
But,
I think
as
anything
we
just
said
to-
earlier, the timescale is tight. And that, you know, that is difficult for people to turn it around. So it's difficult for us to turn it around. We appreciate not everybody's sat there waiting for us to come and talk to them about the budget. So there might still be some gaps in that.
And I think, again, just breaking down those community groups again, which groups were discussed with by us or the independent consultants would be useful. Thank you.
Councillor Coles, was yours a consultation related point?
I'm not sure it is really. It's
If you pause that, and I'll bring Councillor Lomas in to respond to the various comments around consultation and engagement.
Yeah, thanks for that. The output from the first round of consultation is really helpful. And you'll see that when the report comes to you. I suppose there's two levels of depth of it. So there's one which was the online survey, and then there were workshops which explored things in more detail, which I think were the really helpful level for us, because we had things such as, well, why don't you just sort out GP appointments and stop water leaks, and then the education can happen that actually those are not responsibilities for the council, so those are not things that we could impact in any way other than by partnership working. And I think that kind of deeper level of discussion with people who are engaged and want to think about how the council spends money is really valuable. Just to sort of reassure, I suppose, that we did both workshops with residents who had answered the survey and also workshops with community groups. So there was both that happened, and there was some demographic reporting on the kind of general location of people who attended the workshops, so that we have that there's a little map with dots on it, basically, which was really helpful. So that's really good. In terms of council comms, I had a meeting with the head of comms just on Friday to talk about how we do this. Hopefully people have already started seeing some of the things that comms have started on, which happened in parallel with the first level of consultation, which was about social media campaign about what things the council isn't responsible for, and that has generated some quite a lot of feedback, which is all being collated and fed in as well. And we've been talking about how we do that education piece, how we help people to understand what actually does the council do and what does the council not do, and what do we have to do, and what do we have some kind of choice over. The other thing that we've been talking about how to get the message out about is how to help people to understand what funding pays for what. And when we talk about cuts, we're talking about cuts to our revenue funding, but we get given direct funding for quite a few different things in different areas that if we didn't spend it on those specific things, we would have to give back. And so that we've been trying to work out how to get those kind of messages out for those people who are interested in a little bit more detail. Councillor Stewart asked, very sadly has never met anyone who has genuinely engaged in a consultation, which I'm quite sad about. But what has changed as a result of a consultation process? Well, I know you said you've never met anyone who's genuinely engaged in a consultation.
No, this.
Oh, right. Well, there was quite a few of them, so hopefully you'll meet some soon. But what has changed as a result of consultation? Well, nothing yet on this one, because we've only just got the analysis back, but it has helped us to understand how to frame our communications, has helped us to understand how to frame the next phase of consultation. It has helped us to understand what people's priorities are and how people's priorities change when they have discussions about things. What has changed as a result of a consultation process? Well, we did a very limited consultation on last year's budget, but we have changed the way we do things as a result of that, because of some of the really helpful feedback that we had, like the way we manage contracts and the way we look at procurement when we have multiple contracts with the same provider, for example, which is something that saves both us and the contractors money and is a win-win. And I always like a win-win. Councillor Rose asked about how we switch to what to prioritise to cut. And we absolutely are asking those questions of people, and having in the workshops, there was more in-depth conversation, and conversation is always the best way to do that, because I think it's complicated. And of course, I want my bin to be emptied. Of course, I want my street to be free of potholes. But if that has to come at the expense of another service I value, then I might change my perspective on that. I think I've answered Councillor Mason's question on demographics. That definitely is in there. On engagement with people who have contracts with us, that has been happening. But I think, as Debbie said, there's a limit to what we can say to people before we've decided where the cuts are going to sit. But as part of the discussions we've been having around contract management that relates to the output of the consultation last year, we are looking at a lot closer management of those contracts in their entirety, whether they are in an area subject to cuts or not. But I think it'll be hopefully really helpful for you to see the analysis from the consultation, and any thoughts anyone has about how we get that messaging out to residents, always gratefully received.
Thank you. Let's go a couple more hands. Councillor Coles first.
Thanks, Chair. My question was about really the support for the council staff who are going through this process. So obviously we know it's public money, they're delivering public services, but they're also kind of public servants in all of this. So it all kind of goes hand in hand, but actually I'm sure that, whatever it is, 14 years worth of going through this process, particularly for those that have been around for that length of time, is pretty difficult from a staff point of view. And just what measures were in place from an HR perspective. You may not be able to comment on that, but just from a budget setting and support process, it's great that staff are able to feed in their ideas around the ways of making the cuts to services, but ultimately they're public servants trying to deliver value for money, for public money, and it's really difficult for anyone going through that process. So just what support is being planned in for that process kind of now, given that the timetable is already underway, and kind of throughout the rest of the financial year? Thanks.
Yeah, so part of it is what staff have said to us in the past is they just want to know. They want to know what's going on. They want to be involved. And so as soon as we've got the proposal, so we've been doing workshops with staff all the way through and keeping them involved through Ian Floyd's kind of communications with all staff, so that they're aware, obviously they're aware of the financial challenge. They're all living and breathing it every day in terms of managing their services. So we've got another staff briefing session in a couple of weeks' time. Actually, it might even be next week, the week after. Where we're just keeping them up to date on what's happening and what progress. And then when we get the schemes for kind of the consultation, as it were, as in this is, various proposals for balancing the budget, then obviously we'll again go through those with staff involved, particularly, but all staff. So there'll be an opportunity for all staff to get involved, but we'll also put in a particular briefing for, I don't suppose we would do this, Tim, but say we're going to cut the finance team in half. Then obviously before that was published, we would be talking to the finance team to make sure they understood. So we would be, making sure that if staff were particularly impacted, then they would be part of those discussions. We also brief the unions regularly at liaison meetings, so union colleagues are kept informed. And like I've said, we have the kind of staff suggestion scheme, so there's an opportunity for staff to, and I guess any proposal is subject to consultation. So even if at full council you agree this is how we're going to balance the budget, they're still subject to consultation, and there'll be an opportunity for staff to say, don't do that, I've got a better idea and here it is. So we're always going to be listening to those suggestions as well. But I can take away the point to Helen to say if we think we need more support for staff.
Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Abby. It is similar to reports that we've had over successive years, and recognising that even in those days when the council was getting a net increase in cash, we still needed to find millions of pounds of savings, and that was the case every year. The question relates to, you may recall, the More for York process, which was initiated in 2008, when the government made clear that local government financing was going to be severely cut. And therefore there was a 3-year programme to develop blueprints to really take a longer approach than the annual salami slicing in some instances, which had been done year on year. So that enabled a broader approach to looking at those services and looking at how things could be done differently with partners, and that enabled more open discussions, particularly on contracts. Will there be a similar approach going ahead for a longer term view, so that could give a clearer indication on where services are going?
Yes, is the answer. So part of the work we've been doing, looking at the budget strategy, and we started this work last year and it didn't get completed, is to look at what, I guess, I think we all recognise that we can't keep doing everything that we're doing and keep working in the same way that we are working and deliver £30 million worth of budget savings. We've got to do things differently, and we've got to stop doing certain things. But there are savings to be made from business process re-engineering, from being more efficient, from working differently. But that takes resource to drive that out. We haven't got the capacity within existing services for people to then not be delivering their service and go away and spend time coming up with all this other work. So yeah, there will be a proposal coming through to invest some money in transformation resource to support the delivery of the council's financial strategy.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments on the budget setting report? The one question I have, Debbie, so we'll have a report at next month's meeting. Has any thought been given to providing a sort of bespoke report to each other scrutiny committee? For example, some of the outline proposals will be relevant to specific scrutiny committees because of their remit, or is the plan that it will all come here and we will be the kind of one-stop shop in terms of providing comments on the broader package?
The plan is it will all come here. We're not big enough to break it down into lots of different scrutiny committees from a budgeting perspective. Yeah. And I might be wrong, but it's not going to be a long list of hundreds of proposals for £5 here and 20 grand there. And it's going to be bigger amounts, more on a strategic theme, and it's not all going to be nailed down and buttoned down as this is exactly where we're going to get the saving from. There may well be work to do as we move through the process. If there was, for example, one of the service reviews, say, is on adult social care, there may well be, and we put together an outline business case and a programme of work. Absolutely, there may well be a very good reason for that to go to adult scrutiny committee for them to look over that in a bit more detail and give us feedback. But at this stage, it would just be at that high level. The more detailed scrutiny will come in future years.
No, it's fine, just
Okay.
so I can understand what
Yeah.
what it's likely to look like. That's helpful. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the work you're obviously doing on that, and we look forward to seeing the outputs in October at some point. Yeah, we'll see you next month. Thank you very much. Okay, are members happy to carry on, or does anybody need a break? 'Cause we're doing well. We're doing well. I've got a 2-minute break request, so let's take a break, and then we won't have to rush the next agenda item. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So we move on to agenda item 6, which is an update on plans for or a review of the scrutiny function. So this follows the report we received last month, where we had a discussion about what shape a review might take. But we now have the author of the report and is here to provide an update on next steps. So Lindsay.
Thank you, Chair. So members, moving on from the report that came last month, we do now have a funding offer from the LGA to help us fund the review by the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. So CFGS have estimated that the cost of a full review of our scrutiny function is likely to be in the region of £17,000. The LGA have considered the request. We meet the criteria and they will fund £7,000 of that cost, which leaves the balance of £10,000 to be funded by CYC. Debbie has indicated that those funds will be found from existing provision. Bryn and I met with the lead reviewer this afternoon just to talk about what a review will look like, what the likely timescales will be. So the review will, be led by all members. So there'll be an opportunity for all members to have a say in the review. Potentially, we're looking to start it in November. The first stage will be a launch event, and the reviewers are happy to work in whatever way members feel comfortable with. So we can do events in person, we can do events remotely, whatever works best. Talking about starting with a launch event and then going into a survey of all members. And that survey will likely take 3 weeks. So members will be given 3 weeks with some chasers to get responses in. So at the end of that survey process, they'll then go into individual interviews with selected members. So potentially we'll be looking at interviews with the chairs of the scrutiny committees and the deputy chairs of the scrutiny committees, as well as with the executive members. But the reviewers have indicated that any members who wish to, group leaders, any members who wish to be individually interviewed can do. We're at the stage now where we're just starting to pull together what that looks like, who would want to be interviewed. As well as the individual interviews, then they have suggested that we could also run some focus groups. So members who don't want necessarily to be interviewed individually can sit in a focus group, and they've suggested that we could run 2 sets of focus groups across the review period. And again, they will probably be done in person, but we can look at that if for whatever suits members' purposes. It's an evidence-based review, and that evidence will come from what you as members tell the reviewers. They will be asking to look at our procedures, our constitution, rules around scrutiny. They'll be looking at what scrutiny has done in the past in terms of pre-scrutiny work, and gathering all that evidence throughout the whole process. The indicative timescale, assuming that we'd start in November and we do the interviews towards the end of November, the indicative timescale for getting a draft report produced is early in the new year. And then the draft report will come to members for review and for consideration. And then there'll be some discussions and some kind of to and fro in to come up with a final report and recommendations. CFGS don't just stop there. They don't just provide a report and say this is what you need to do, go away and do it. They will help us and support us in implementing any recommendations coming out of the review. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Lindsay. Before I open it up to members for comments and questions, just paragraph 12 of the report. So the £5,000 that we have set aside to support Scrutiny's work, that will remain. That's not forming part of the £10,000 cost.
I will need to check that with Debbie. It may be that Debbie has earmarked that to help fund that 10,000, but I will confirm that, Chair, and I'll let you know.
Okay. So I've got Councillor Stewart first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I just thought you could get me out of the way because I can speak with a different voice, no doubt, to everybody else on the committee. So my view would be I wouldn't do this. I think it's absurd how much time the council spends paying for reviews, reading reviews. You know, for me, whilst the LGA are going to pay some, ultimately we are financiers of the LGA. We're still paying £10,000, and you know, I've never been in a productive LGA review at the council. We get the reviews, they're often to supposedly solve a problem. And so I personally wouldn't be doing this. I do apologise. I'm sure everyone can take over and give a totally conflicting view and say how it's great value. It's going to change scrutiny. But for me, £10,000 to scrutinise the scrutiny is not a great way to spend money.
Just to clarify, the LGA are providing some finance, but the review is being undertaken by the Centre for Scrutiny and Governance.
You know, that's fine. It's the nature of all these reviews. And
No, I just want to clarify,
yeah.
it's not an LGA review, it's LGA part funding.
We've never been reviewed by these people before, have we? So obviously I can't say how good or bad they are. I'm talking about the reviews the councillors had in my experience,
Okay.
which have been usually been LGA.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not going to be quite as cynical, but and I would say I have had quite a lot of dealings with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny when I was in the chair of this committee, and found them to be a really useful and helpful resource. So you know, I will remain at least open-minded as to the outcome of any review. What I just wanted to say actually was the point that you raised, but perhaps just make it a bit stronger. If we are going to fund this, I think it's really important that actually there's then resource available for any outcomes. And I would suspect that one of the outcomes may well be looking at the ongoing training of members. It's certainly something that myself and yourself, Councillor Fenton, have advocated over a period of time. And I think it would be a shame if the £5,000 that was allocated was subsumed into this. Depending on the timing, I could see a circumstance whereby it potentially could be in this financial year, but I would want some sort of a guarantee that certainly next financial year there would be funding available to potentially support any of the outcomes of a review if we're going to spend money on a review.
No, thank you. Do you want to respond?
Just to say that actually, you know, that the opportunity to make those points will come during the review, and you know, hopefully any recommendations will include a clause about, well, yes, this will need to, you know, to be followed up by training, and so council will need to make budgetary provisions, so we can look to, you know, influence those recommendations to ensure that. But I will check with Debbie about whether that £5,000 is being left as is. That is separate, of course, from the member training budget, which is another £5,000. So we're having a look at that. And within Democratic Services, we've got a few projects running, Scrutiny Review being one of them, but the other one is we've got a little group looking at member training and development, how we can do it a bit better and better engage with members, and how we use that budget provision. So there's some options there, but absolutely you'll be able to influence the review and ensure that, you know, that there's something in there about the need for training, definitely.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Thanks. I mean, I agree with both of the points that have already made. I think that £10,000 is a lot of money. And, you know, we need to know that what we get out of it is worth more than that. And that's, you know, not guaranteed. And I think I was assuming that £10,000 does include a lot of that £5,000. And if it doesn't, that's more money we've got to find from somewhere else, which is, you know, worth noting. And the flip side of the same thing, which is, it is important that we have the outcomes. We do need to be able to spend on supporting them. I just wanted clarity from you that the £17,000 indicative cost of the review does include all of the external time in supporting those outcomes long term as well, if that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, that 17,000 covers everything. So that all of the external support, all of the time, the number of days has been calculated that the external reviewers will need to input into the process. So yes, that £70,000, I don't expect that to increase. That should be everything included.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess it still is a lot of money, and I'm sure they're excellent, but are we going to definitely get that amount back out of them? It's hard to say.
Thank you. Councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Kind of first one was a question, just we've talked a lot about members being involved, but are we expecting key officers to also be included in that process in terms of interviews, because they spend a lot of time?
I would say so, yes. We did indicate that key officers should be, so because I think this, as well as looking at procedures and processes, also looks at the culture of scrutiny, and that stretches right across the officer team as well as, you know, across the members. So yeah, I would expect key officers who have an input to scrutiny to be included in those interviews, definitely.
Fine, yeah. And then the other part, I would more just a point that, yeah, supportive of it, I think, in terms of it. I think there's a lot more we could, a lot of, you know, even if we're talking about money, 10,000 sounds like a large amount, but a lot of officer time goes into preparing scrutiny reports, a lot of time and expense goes into doing it. And often there's a lot of scrutiny committees, I'm not saying this one, but lots of other ones, lots of time goes into it and not many outcomes come out of it. So I think there's a lot more that can be done with the time that's being spent on scrutiny. Well, hopefully there is. I've only been here for a year and a half, so I'll find out in another year's time, I guess. That's the case.
Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Lindsay, thank you very much for this report. Having attended some training sessions way back in 2000, when scrutiny was going to be this bright, fantastic thing, replicating the powers of the select committees in the House of Commons, and it hasn't quite worked out that way, but it's still a thing. And that I recognise that this will have to justify the expenditure, and therefore, if by spending this amount of money on this, that we get more than £10,000 worth of potholes additionally done, then it will have paid for itself. But I do think that there needs to be that recognition of justifying this expenditure, which on one level may be seen as navel gazing, but if it's about getting acceptance of member challenge, just as school governors are there to challenge as a critical friend, that it'd be useful to draw out those aspects of scrutiny that could be improved. Those bits that have worked, and I was very surprised, Councillor Stewart, that you hadn't held as the gold standard Councillor Galvin's street sweeping scrutiny process. He never stopped talking about it. But I think there are examples of where it has resulted in some changes of processes that have actually saved money, delivered a better service, and therefore those are examples that do need to be reminded. But I think it is important that, as you mentioned, the culture is also changed, because if this helps to break down the silos, then it will have been money well spent.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Healy.
Good Chair. As part of this exercise, I personally would find it very useful if they could give some examples of how other authorities organise this, because I personally have the feeling that we tend to spend a lot of time noting things from the past. Like today, for instance, the budget, we spent most of the time on the budget. A lot of other topics tend to be almost like sort of informational awareness. You know, how does I have a particular interest in subject A. Can an officer write a report and come along and explain subject A to us? I would suggest that we don't really do much at all of what I think you brought up at the last meeting around taking a view about something we could give to the executive and say, well, look, we've looked into this subject in quite a bit of detail and we think you'll be better at doing this. So the street sweeping service would be an example, and almost, do we need to separate out those two things?
Okay.
It's more.
Yeah, no, that's please, yeah.
I think that's exactly what we're aiming to look for, Councillor Healy, is, you know, to get some real benefit from scrutiny and to look at how we can do it better, more effectively. And instead of, you know, lots of meetings where we bring information reports, do some actual really meaningful scrutiny that can add benefit, and do a lot more of the pre-scrutiny can help the executive to shape and form their proposals and their policies and their strategies going forward. So it was a bit of a shift in focus from not so much the kind of looking back, but more the looking forward, and just changing the approach, changing how we view scrutiny, and changing the effectiveness, essentially. And you know, hopefully, yes, there will be savings to come from that, and some efficiency to come from that. As I say, you know, changing the culture is a difficult thing to do, but you've got to start somewhere. But you know, that's, members will get out of this what members want to get out of it, and so, you know, it will be in your gift to take on board the recommendations that come out for the review, and implementing any of those recommendations going forward. So, you know, members will, the Centre for Governance Scrutiny have done a lot of these reviews, and they're all available on the website to have a look at, and certainly they will look at good practice elsewhere. They'll bring that into the recommendations when they're looking at how we do things, and there might be things that we do that are really good, and you know, that might be a recommendation going forward to other authorities, but certainly they will bring all that experience about what works, you know, what works in this kind of authority, and what, you know, that will all come out in the recommendations in the draft report.
Thank you. Councillor Crawshaw.
Yeah, just sort of going back to the point around the sort of what happens afterwards, because I think, you know, we can have a review, and we can, you know, have all of that sort of input and things, but it seems to me, so you know, this is obviously stuff that I will give to the people coming and reviewing, but you know, in a very shorthand way, when I first joined the council in 2017, there were 2 full-time equivalent dedicated scrutiny officers who were supporting I think it was 4 or 5 committees at the time, and that over a period of time, people left, they weren't replaced. There was conversations about running hybrid roles between members of Dem Services, so that we would have at least equivalent officer time allocated to supporting the scrutiny committees, and not in any way to knock the Dem Services officers, who I think work incredibly hard, but a lot of the support that comes to the committee is more in administrative and the sort of clerking side, rather than that dedicated scrutiny officer time. So we can have an all singing, all dancing review that could come out with a whole bunch of recommendations. Is there at least an openness to a review of whether it's Dem Services or the sort of back office that supports the scrutiny function to go alongside this? Because I think the danger is the conversation is always about being member led, and it's always about, you know, the members can get in, you know, get out of it what they want to, and all of those sorts of things. But actually, if you're reliant on officers to deliver you information, and those officers are quite stretched, and you know, maybe don't always see the point of coming to scrutiny, and therefore giving the time to scrutiny to provide that. That's the role that the scrutiny officers used to do, was that managing and being in a bit of resource to pull that in. And I think probably those of us who've been around would all recognise the loss of that time and dedicated resource to supporting scrutiny. So I'm not asking you to commit to anything at this moment in time, but just knowing that there's an openness there, at least, I think is really important.
Completely. And you know, back in, you know, the dark history, I've been a scrutiny officer. I've done the scrutiny officer role, and I've done the joint scrutiny and democratic service officer role, and I know how tough it is to do both, and to do both really well. We have got, you're absolutely right, we haven't got dedicated scrutiny support anymore, but we do have a team of really dedicated governance officers who do their best and want to do more, and we as a team want to do more around support and scrutiny, and do more of that research and that scrutiny support. But because we're in a kind of a bit of a cycle of, you know, agendas and minutes and meetings, and it's non-stop, there's not really the space, the time to do that. Now, if the review can look at that and look at the timescales and the, you know, the number of meetings and how we organise those meetings, then that perhaps gives us a little bit of space where we can say, well, actually, that means we can dedicate more of the DSO time to actually doing that scrutiny support. We've got DSOs who really enjoy getting their teeth into scrutiny, but they just haven't got the space because we're so busy with meetings to actually do it. So there is the will there absolutely in the officer team, but I think everything kind of comes together to give us, the change that we need to be able to affect that, so that we can give more dedicated scrutiny support. It's tough. It is tough doing the joint role. Absolutely. I've done that. I know how hard it is. But if we can just kind of restructure and rethink about how we do the meetings. And I've worked in other places where, we've cut down the scrutiny committees and we've done more work through task and finish group. And that, can also then bring in support from the service departments to support this task and finish work as well. So there's other things that we can do to give more support, more dedicated support to scrutiny. But certainly, yes, we will have the discussions. Officers will be, engaging with the scrutiny review and making those points clear. But it needs, again, members need to, make those views known, and I'm certainly hearing it.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Thank you. And a quick point to say thank you for getting £7,000 out of the LGA. They're not made of money. It is a lot more palatable. 10,000, 17,000, and it was an ask from the committee last time round. An open question, I guess, for a combination of you and the chair, of the minutes we approved said bringing a more detailed proposal back to the committee, and it is much more detailed and it's a lot more specific. In terms of it being a proposal, though, to what extent is any of this just for our awareness and for our general comment, and we'll feedback the same things when we have those initial one-to-ones or focus groups, versus how much of this is still in flux? Is there a way of bringing down that cost and cutting some stuff out? That sort of question.
So this is being shared with us. We don't have the power of veto to say don't do any of this. I think there is a corporate commitment to undertake a review. So from my perspective, we have an opportunity to input into it so that it delivers the most benefit it can. If senior managers say, "Oh, we found a different way to achieve the same outcome," fine. But I don't think we're in a place where we're kind of micromanaging, saying, "Well, tell you what, spend 8,000, and we're going to lop off some of the aspects of the review." I don't think we're not. That's not what we're being asked to do. It's to say this is what we're planning to do and to comment on it, but not to have a kind of veto over it.
I think that's fair, Chair. Because this is a specific action within the corporate improvement plan, then it's happening, and the recommendation is that we undertake a review of scrutiny, and the LGA are giving a significant amount of the funding towards that. But I think what we're really looking for from the committee is some kind of ideas and guidance about how you would like to be involved. Do you think the focus groups are a good idea? Who do you think should be interviewed individually? We've talked potentially about chairs, deputy chairs of scrutiny, group leaders, executive members, and certain senior officers. So it's really to get your views and your kind of, ideas about the level of input that you would like to have as scrutiny members, and, take it from there.
Yeah. Councillor Rose.
I guess to a more specific question, appreciating we're scrutiny, we're not a decision making, we can make recommendations, but are the comments made around cost and other points we made here today going to be discussed? And is that finance still up in the air as a conversation point, or is that all locked in and the question is just what are we going to do within that?
So I would say the finance is locked in. Debbie has been clear that £10,000 is there. It will be found. It's available from current provision. So I don't think we're going to get much movement on the finance. I think if we look to do this review a different way, I'm not sure we'd get the same outcome. Certainly there is. I wouldn't say there's the capacity within the officer team. Although there's the will and the experience, but I don't think there's the capacity given everything else that we've got to deal with at the moment. And I think, given that the CFGS are the experts and have done very many reviews already, they've got the tools ready. They can go straight away, and they've got all of that capacity to deliver. So I think, yes, £10,000 is a lot of money, but I think it will, potentially will be a good investment if we can, get a effective scrutiny and make some efficiencies and look at just doing things a little bit better, well, a lot better coming out of it. So yeah, I think the money is locked in, the funding is locked in. I don't think there's much kind of wriggle room there, but I think it's for members to get out of it what we can for that £10,000 input.
Councillor Crawshaw, do you have a supplementary?
It wasn't, well, it was partly supplementary, but it was kind of just on that feedback
Yeah.
around, you know, the different types of approaches, and if now is the appropriate you know, time for that. I mean, my view, and I will say this with a partly vested interest as one of the former chairs, but you know, my view is absolutely speak to the current chairs and vice chairs, but you know, that there are several of us who chaired some of these committees for 4 years in the previous administration and have had that level of experience that I think would be you know, valued. We certainly, as chairs in, I don't know what currently goes on, but the former round of chairs, we did quite a lot of working together, talking about the way that the scrutiny function was working. And I suppose, you know, in a similar vein, you've got a current crop of exec members, but there'll be a former group of exec members who will have had, you know, the experience under the previous thing. My view would be that if you're doing a focus group type approach, just needs to have some careful thought around it, because I think if you watch back to the discussion that we had on this exact topic on the last meeting of this committee, it had moments of tension, which, you know, probably are worth exploring, but perhaps not with all of the protagonists around the table in one go. So, you know, whether or not we need to think about, you know, conversations within the political groups or you know, quite how that's handled, because I think it's clear that there's been frustrations on all sides in the way that scrutiny has operated, you know, previously, and for what it's worth, my view would be that, you know, I personally would rather sit down with somebody and have a you know, half-hour chat individually rather than sit around with, you know, colleagues and sort of maybe get a couple of minutes to make a point within a broader discussion. The other point, sorry, one other thing I just wanted to mention as well, which again I did mention previously, but I think there is probably some value in, there has been scrutiny reviews in the council before that have been led by this committee and others, and it may be worth just having a look back at what were some of the things that were put forward at that time, why weren't they adopted, or if they were adopted, you know, how did they and didn't they work? And in a similar vein, you know, the chair of this committee puts a report to council. There's a whole back sort of catalogue of reports that have come to the council, you know, yeah, but no one ever reads. Yeah, but we put a lot of time into. No, but I think you know, there is some genuine value in some of the information that has already been pulled together around scrutiny. So there's no point in reinventing a wheel, I suppose.
Yeah, I think just what I think I'd be keen for the reviewers to talk to any member who has an interest and has experience and ideas and is willing to share them, you know, and that may include but not be limited to chairs and vice chairs. And
we can email members and ask, you know, set out what the review is going to look at, and ask anyone who's interested in one-to-one interview to put their name forward, and we can include them. The Centre for Goodness Studio are really clear that they're very open, they're very flexible. They'll do this the way that we want them to do it, and they will interview as many people, and that can either be in person or via Teams or whatever method suits members best. So what we want to do is make sure that every member who wants to have a say in this review has their say in the best way for them. So we will ensure that that happens.
Thank you. Councillor Merritt.
This is quite challenging. 17k doesn't go a long way, and yet it is still a lot of money. I'm you know, slightly concerned about the balance of how much of, you know, what's it going to be, 1,000 a day, so 17 somebody's time, 17 days time. How much is spent in interviewing us, as opposed to, you know, if they have an enormous amount of knowledge and expertise from having done this from council after a council, how much actually should perhaps be them talking to us about their experience and how they've seen different things done, where they've seen the real value coming from scrutiny, and actually giving us a sense of what the options are, rather than us, you know, simply going through an exercise where we reflect our experiences. I mean, that needs to be part of it, but I think there needs to be a balance about how much we're leading from our experiences, good or bad, and how much we're really taking from them and getting a real sense of what we could do and how we could do things. And then, coming to conclusions around that, which I would have thought was perhaps much the more important thing, because that's where we really get the additional value, as opposed to simply just getting a written report at the end. That it's actually engagement in working out how we're going to do this differently is the thing that I'd want to get out of this.
Yeah.
So
There's supposed to be around how.
I think it will be important that there's a clear remit for this and we actually see where the time is going to go and that we've actually got the right balance of time on this.
Yeah.
So so Councillor Merrick, yes, we have discussed how that will work with the CFGS and the reviewer, and they happen to have taken a lot of these reviews, so they know how much time it will take, and they're clear that they can complete the work in the time that they've specified. What they're doing is interviewing. It's an evidence-based review, so they're looking at. We're going to send them a lot of information. We're going to send a lot of our documents, our procedures. Previous reviews will all come into it. We'll gather that evidence and we will send that to them so they can start reviewing that. When they interview you, they will be talking about. This is based on what is right for the City of York Council. What scrutiny should look like for the City of York may not be what scrutiny looks like at another authority. But yes, they will be bringing in their experience about what works well at other places. And what they'll be doing when they're interviewing you is getting, what members think of scrutiny, what members think scrutiny should be looking like, and then balancing that against, their experience of what works well elsewhere and having those discussions. And that will then lead them to a report with recommendations, which will bring in their experience, their expertise about what works well and what would work well for City of York based on the discussions and interviews with members and with officers. So I think it will be a balance. We'll ensure that, that message is really clear. It's a balance between what works well elsewhere, what will work well for City of York, what do members want out of scrutiny going forward.
Okay. Is that a supplementary? Well, go ahead then.
Picking up the point about lots of councillors taking up lots of time. We do this activity on behalf of residents. Is there going to be any opportunity for, I don't know, outside bodies?
I did specifically ask that question. They don't extend that would increase the cost and the amount of time that would be taken. But of course, what members can do, there will be reports coming back to committees for consideration. So there'll be opportunity for public input into those reports. But specifically the review, it's internal. It's members and officers, but it's not. It won't stretch to externals. Okay. I did ask that specific question before we came into the meeting.
But there'll be nothing stopping members of the public speaking with councillors to share their views and ideas, and for that to feed in via that route. So I'll leave that sort with you, Councillor Healy. Councillor Mason.
I'm afraid I was going to say something similar about kind of those arm's length bodies like Make It York and Data Trust, Museums Trust, that there's kind of a quasi relationship and they come to these committees and report to us what we could do to find out from them what they felt was useful and if they thought it's just what the process is like for them and how it could be improved to make it actually of use for them in terms of sharing their development plans, whatever else, and have some real scrutiny and help them form policy. But if it sounds like they'd probably be covered by that blanket, anyone external.
And there's nothing to stop members having those discussions before you come into your interview and feeding that into the process. Absolutely.
And I mean, the reviewers may have a view when looking at our agendas, thinking, questioning and maybe discussing with us, well, these various organisations come and report. They all have a particular relationship with the council. Whether it's through Explore, who are the contract holder for library services, or YMT or whoever. So that I suppose that might feed into looking at what Scrutiny does, and as you say, a big part of that is engaging with those groups on behalf of residents as providers of services that residents value. But no, it's a fair point. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, just on that, listening to the conversation there, is there merit in inviting partners to send in a 200-word written response as part of the process and that being absorbed? It doesn't feel like that would necessarily add too much cost, but might get that without having to go through us lot. Just a thought.
Yeah, and it may be if chairs of committees are being interviewed, so the children, culture and communities may want to say, say to Explore and YMT, I'm talking to these people about scrutiny. Do you have anything you'd like to tell me to feed into that discussion? But it's a good point in terms of,
I did say that I would speak to the reviewers tomorrow just to feedback the committee's thoughts and views, and certainly we can put that to them and ask for the best way to affect that. So certainly we'll put that to them and see, what mechanism we can put in place to ensure that impact.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Yeah, I'm just going to just add a note of caution really in terms of reach, but also just thinking about at what point do we start to, what's the purpose of the review and where are we starting from? There has been ongoing conversation for a very long time about the number of reports that come to the committee, particularly from external bodies. In a number of cases, I think there's probably a bit of a legacy issue where actually things that we weren't quite sure how they should come through the council and where they should come through the council, and therefore let's chuck them to scrutiny because that's convenient. So I think the problem is that actually if the review is going to look at what is the function of scrutiny for and about, it may well be that one of the things that it says is you're receiving an awful lot of stuff, particularly from some of your external partners, that doesn't really belong here. So if we then have engaged them and have asked them to take part in a process that the process says, well, actually, you shouldn't really have been there in the first place, let alone taken part. I would take a steer from Centre for Governance and Scrutiny on that, and it may be that actually following the outcome of this initial stage of review, there's then a piece of work to be done around engaging with the external partners as to what they want their future relationship with scrutiny to be, rather than asking them at this stage, because I imagine quite a few of them will say, well, we don't really know quite why we go here, and we might all say, well, we don't really quite know why you come here either. So
yeah, no, that's if we can make progress on that front, that'll probably be one of a number of benefits of doing this piece of work, hopefully. Okay, thank you everybody for your comments, and if you can keep us posted and feedback to colleagues at CFGS some of the ideas and thoughts raised by members. But for my part, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to engaging with it, and it's our opportunity really to try and make scrutiny as good as it can be. And if we put the work in, I'm sure we'll reap the rewards as a result of our efforts. So, but thank you, Lindsay, for the work you've done to pull this together. And I think we've penciled in January to have maybe just kind of a stock take report back to this committee, just something fairly brief, so we know where we're headed. Okay, so the final item 7 is work plan. So looking ahead to November, it's quite a chunky agenda. We've got the complaints and compliments annual report, which we've had a sort of a flavour of earlier. I might want to get into more detail. Budget proposals, following on from what we've discussed today, and our favourite council motions and schedule of petitions. So look at all the things that have been delegated to us from full council. We've also got workforce strategy, which Helen Whiting had asked to be deferred to later in the year. Initially, we were going to take it in the summer. I'll liaise with Helen just to see where we are with that, and whether if there's very little to say in that report, I'd rather we deferred it and picked it up at a later date. But I don't want to rush something if it's going to be something that we need to spend some time on and have meaningful input into. So we just I need to recheck with Helen terms of where we are in the cycle of that work and whether November is the right time for scrutiny to have some input. But if the chair and vice chair, and myself and the vice chair will have those conversations and take a view as to what best to do, but I'm just conscious otherwise we might not do it justice at next month's meeting. Anyone have any comments on the work plan? Councillor Crawshaw?
Just a super quick one. It's actually from the supplementary, I think, rather than our one. It was just about the telecoms digital switchover, and that isn't allocated, and that having discussed it in January 24 and an update be required. I just wondered whether, and this may have already been discussed, whether or not that update could be tagged on to January 25, but as just a report, an update to note, and with a view that if members wish to have a further detailed discussion about it, it'd be allocated further on, you know, in the work plan. But my understanding when that item was discussed in the first instance was more that we wanted a watching brief on it rather than necessarily to return to it in any great detail. So if it came as a report to just to note, that might be timely. And then, as I say, we can always seek to do a more detailed look at it later in the work plan.
Yeah, no, that I'm fine with that. And there may be other things, the 3G switch off. I don't know well, that's part of the same conversation, but there's all kinds of other things going on. Councillor Rose?
Yeah, my comment was going to be almost exactly the opposite of that, but on the same topic, which is it's unallocated, but I've had a number of residents reach out about issues with their existing infrastructure. The BT aren't properly maintained, not willing to spend money on fixing. They're struggling to get the council to act. And so understanding whether there's anything that, you know, what the situation with that and kind of scrutiny of the transition and the programme in general is, but also in terms of the specific issues, if there's a way we can accelerate the move in certain areas, if we know there are known issues, or a bit of a conversation around that, perhaps what might be wise, and leaving that longer means that the issues that we're currently dealing with will continue to get worse, probably. But it was just it might be a very me thing. I just assume if I've had more than one person, then other councils have probably got similar issues.
We can have a chat with Roy Grant in terms of if we can get someone there from Openreach, that would be brilliant in terms of talking more generally about maintenance of existing infrastructure, which does sit within the remit of this committee. Yeah, I'll have a chat with Roy, see if we can. If he thinks there would be kind of merit in trying to sort of broaden the scope of that item, but I can't say I've personally had a lot of any queries or complaints about dodgy BT wiring, but might just be me. I don't know. Usually tree branches
a tree branches is part of that, exactly. But that's exactly one of the things is
oh well, yeah, Councillor Merrick.
But if you're in a situation where you could, instead of having to faff about with a wire and do a tree branch, use those properties as pilots to not worry about it across the city and do something faster, you know, are other possible, etc.
Okay, I'll have a chat with Roy Grant and see where we want to take that. Any other comments? Nope. There's no urgent business. So thank you for your attendance and your contributions, and good night.